Let's just take a moment and arrive here all together, letting your eyes close, and just gather your attention here in the body, here in this room. I know we've all been here for a little while, but this is an opportunity to really arrive fully in our body. Maybe wiggling your toes and just feel your feet on the floor. You can feel both legs, your seat in the chair. Feel your hips and buttocks. Feel your tailbone and just draw your awareness up the spine, softening your shoulders. Let your awareness pour down both arms into the palms of the hands. And if your mind has wandered off, don't worry, that's natural. Just bring it back. Bring the awareness here into the hands. And then up into the belly. Soften the belly. Soften the chest. Soften the shoulders, the throat, your face, softening the jaw, the eyes, the forehead, the temples. Just let your whole face rest. Maybe tilting the chin down a millimeter so the back of the neck can lengthen. Feel the back of the head, the top of the head, the sides. And just getting a sense of your whole body sitting here. And notice that you're breathing. And no need to control the breath, just feel the breath as it naturally flows in and out of the body. Just being here. And again, all we're doing is arriving. And perhaps inviting in your intention for being here tonight. What is most important? It could be to connect, to learn, to stay open, to stay in touch with your body, whatever it is. Just finding a word or a short phrase that helps you remember why you're here. And as you're ready, letting that go and take a deeper breath in and out. You can let some light come back in through your eyes. You can stretch your arms up above your head and just move in any way that's comfortable. Okay, good. Welcome. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to give a very short 15-minute or so PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll shift more into conversation and questions, and really I like to think of it as conversation, actually. Okay, so I want to begin by inviting you to consider the following. If in rush hour traffic you can remain perfectly calm, if you can see your neighbors travel to fantastic places without a twinge of jealousy, if you can love everyone around you unconditionally, and if you can always find contentment just where you are, then you're probably a dog. Right? Thank you. Right? We hold ourselves to these unrealistic standards of perfection, and then we judge ourselves when we don't live up to them. The thing is, perfection isn't possible. But transformation is. All of us have the capacity to change, to learn, to grow, no matter what our circumstances. So as a professor and scientist, I study how people change, how people transform. And one of the most effective vehicles I've found is mindfulness. I'll just stand here so I don't have to do that there. So my own journey into mindfulness was quite unexpected. When I was 17, I had spinal fusion surgery. So I had a metal rod put in my spine. And I went from this healthy, active teenager to, can you notice that? It feels so good, thank you. I went from this healthy, active teenager to lying in a hospital bed, unable to walk. And during the months of rehabilitation, I tried to figure out how to live in this body that could no longer do what it used to do. And it began a period of searching for something that could help. And eventually, this search led me to a monastery in Thailand for my first meditation retreat. So at the monastery, the monks didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak any Thai. But I kind of understood mindfulness had something to do with paying attention in the present moment. My only instruction was to feel my breath going in and out of my nose. So I began. 1 breath, 2 breaths. My mind wandered off. I brought it back. 1 breath, 2, it wandered again, right? Sucked into the past or lost in the future. And no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't stay present. Now this was frustrating because I thought meditation was supposed to look like this, right? And instead, it felt more like this. You know what I'm talking about. Being present isn't so easy. In fact, check it out for yourself. So I've been speaking for maybe 3 minutes. Have you noticed your mind has wandered? All of our minds wander. Research from Harvard shows the mind wanders on average 47% of the time. 47%. That's half of your life that you're missing, that you're not here. So part of mindfulness is simply training the mind in how to be here where you already are, like right now, right? So just take a moment, let your eyes close after you get your pen, and just feel your feet again on the floor. Wiggle your toes and see if it's a little easier this time to connect in. Feel both legs, feel your seat, feel your spine and torso and shoulders, connecting with both arms, hands, belly. And to see, are you here? Has your mind wandered? Come back. Feel your chest, your throat, your face, softening the jaw again. It's amazing how quickly it gets tight. Soften the eyes, the forehead, and again, just feel your whole body sitting here. Just being present. Good. You can let your eyes open. Bless you. Okay, so back at the monastery, I was trying hard to do just this, to just stay present. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept wandering off. And at this point, I really started to judge myself. What's wrong with you? You're terrible at this. Why are you even here? You're a fake. And then not only was I judging myself, I started judging everyone, even the monks. Why are they just sitting here? Shouldn't they be doing something? It wasn't pretty. Luckily, a monk from London arrived who spoke English. And as I shared with him my struggles, he looked at me and said, "Oh dear, you're not practicing mindfulness. You're practicing judgment, impatience, frustration." And then he said 5 words that have never left me. What you practice grows stronger. What you practice grows stronger. We know this now with neuroplasticity. Our repeated experiences shape our brain. We can actually sculpt and strengthen our synaptic connections based on repeated practice. For example, in the famous study of London taxi drivers, the visual spatial mapping part of the brain is bigger and stronger. They've been practicing navigating the 25,000 streets of London all day long. When you look at the brains of meditators, the areas associated with attention, memory, learning, compassion are bigger and stronger. What you practice grows stronger. The monk explained to me, this is called a cortical thickening. It's the growth of new neurons in response to repeated practice. So the monk explained to me that if I was meditating with judgment, I was growing judgment. If you're meditating with frustration, you're growing frustration. He helped me understand that Mindfulness is not just about paying attention, it's about how you pay attention, with kindness. He also explained to me that we're not just practicing when we're meditating, we're actually practicing all the time. Like right here in this moment, you're practicing something. And so the question really becomes, what do you want to practice? What do you want to grow? When I left Thailand, I wanted to keep practicing mindfulness, and I wanted to understand it scientifically. So I began a PhD program, eventually became a professor, and I've spent the past 20 years studying the effects of mindfulness across a wide range of populations, including women with breast cancer, patients with insomnia, veterans with PTSD, stressed out college students. And what was interesting is that over and over again, the data showed two key things. The first is that mindfulness works. It's good for you. It strengthens our immune functioning, it decreases cortisol, it reduces stress, it helps us sleep better. It's good for you. Our first research we published back in 1998, and since then there's been thousands of studies showing the beneficial effects of mindfulness. The second thing we learned was quite unexpected. Almost all the people we worked with, regardless of their age, their gender, their background, were talking about the same thing. This ubiquitous sense of, I'm not good enough, I'm not okay, I'm not living this life right, there's something wrong with me. They talked about this tremendous shame and self-judgment. And we all know what they were talking about, right? We've all experienced at one point or another this self-judgment and this shame. And worse, we often mistakenly believe that if we shame ourselves, if we beat ourselves up, we'll somehow improve, we'll change. But shame doesn't work. Shame never works. It can't work. Literally, it can't work because when we feel shame, the centers of the brain that have to do with learning and growth shut down. So this fMRI shows the brain on shame. I need you to laugh. You're my laughing guy. All right. This shows, thank you. This shows the brain on shame. And basically what happens is when we feel shame, the amygdala triggers a cascade of norepinephrine and cortisol to flood our system, shutting down the learning centers of the brain and shuttling our resources to survival pathways. Shame literally robs the brain of the energy it needs to do the work of changing and growing. And worse, when we feel shame, we want to avoid it. So we hide from the parts of ourselves that most need our attention. It's just too painful to look at them. So what's the alternative? Right? How can we change? How can we grow without this shame or this self-judgment or this striving for perfection? I believe the alternative is kind attention. Okay. First, kindness gives us the courage we need to look at those parts of ourselves we don't want to see. And second, kindness bathes our system with dopamine, turning on the learning centers of the brain, giving us the resources we need to change. True and lasting transformation requires kind attention. So, as I thought about this, I remembered the monk's words that mindfulness isn't just about attention, it's about kind attention. So my colleagues and I developed a model of mindfulness that explicitly includes our attitude, our intention, as well as our attention, all three parts working together synergistically. Mindfulness then is intentionally paying attention with kindness. So we used this model while working at a veterans hospital for a group of men with PTSD. And when I started working there, I was shocked to learn the statistic that we lose more veterans to suicide each year than to combat. Our soldiers carry so much pain and shame. So the intention of the group was to cultivate this kind attention, even for the parts of ourselves that were seemingly unforgivable. And there was one man in the group who never said a word, never looked up. 2 months passed. He seemed unreachable. And then one day he raised his hand and he said, "I don't want to get better. What I saw in the war, what I did, I don't deserve to get better. He looked back down at the ground and proceeded to tell us in great detail what he had seen and what he had done. And I can still feel the horror of what he shared and how his shame filled the room. I looked up to see how the other men were responding, and there was no judgment on their faces, only compassion. I invited him to look up and to witness this compassion. And as he slowly looked around the room, you could see his face begin to soften. And in his eyes, there was hope. The possibility that he wasn't just his past actions, that he could choose differently now, that he could change. And this may be one of the most important things I've learned, and what I most hope you'll take with you. It's that transformation is possible for all of us, no matter what. And it requires kind attention. And this kind attention, it takes practice. It takes lots of practice. So I want to close with a simple practice that continues to help me. Some years ago, I was going through a difficult divorce, and I'd wake up every morning with this pit of shame and self-judgment. And my meditation teacher suggested I start an explicit practice of kind attention. She said, how about saying, I love you, Shauna, every day? And I thought to myself, no way. I just felt so inauthentic and not where I was. So she saw my hesitation and said, how about just saying, good morning, Shauna? I said, fine, I can handle that. So the next day, and then she says, try putting your hand on your heart when you say it. It releases oxytocin. It's good for you, you know. She knew the science would win me over. So the next morning, I woke up, put my hand on my heart, took a breath, and said, good morning, Shauna. And it was kind of nice. I continued to practice, and a month later, when I saw her, I admitted how helpful it had been. Wonderful, she said. You've graduated. Now, the advanced practice. Good morning. I love you, Shauna. So I went home the next morning, put my hand on my heart. Good morning. I love you, Shauna. I felt nothing, except maybe a little ridiculous, but definitely not love. But I kept practicing because, as we know, what you practice grows stronger. And then one day I put my hand on my heart, took a breath. Good morning. I love you, Shauna. And I felt it. I felt my grandmother's love. I felt my mother's love. I felt my own self-love. And I wish I could tell you every day since then has been this bubble of self-love, and I've never felt shame or self-judgment again, and that's not true. But what is true is this pathway of kind attention has been established, and it's growing stronger every day. So I want to invite you tomorrow to put your hand on your heart and say good morning. And if you're really brave, good morning. I love you. Thank you. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was really inspiring and heartwarming. So thank you so much, Shauna. I want to clap again. It was so good. So we have a good amount of time for questions. I was
going to maybe lead them through a little practice
and
then
were.
do questions.
Okay,
but
great.
You popped up so fast. I was like, welcome.
Okay, well, let's do this. Sounds great.
So what I want you to do is just take a moment and let your eyes close, because what often happens is we kind of race through experience and we miss it, trying to fill it up with more information. And so what I want you to do is soften the body, soften the heart. I just shared a lot of information and a lot of emotion. And so see if you can just let it land in the body. Feel your breath. Just finding what pieces resonated with you. Just letting whatever serves you to become part of your chemical soup, part of who you are, as we allow all of this to transform us. And then I want to invite you to reflect on one kind of nugget, one piece of this that you really want to anchor in the body and take with you. Take just a moment to really feel that in your body. Just choosing one thing feels important. It could be a word or a phrase or an image or something that touched you that you want to take with you. Breathing that in, allowing it to really become integrated into who you are. Trusting that the seeds that are planted right now are going to continue to grow and deepen. Bless you. Trusting that we're all going at the right pace, that we're learning in the right way, just creating space. And as you're ready, taking a deeper breath in and out. You can let some light come back in through the eyes, and again, just stretch your arms above your head. Good. And I'm going to invite you just to turn to the person next to you and just in softer voices, not too much conversation, just share the one nugget that you want to take with you. Go ahead. We'll just take a minute to do this. As you're ready, coming back to the larger group. Okay, good. So coming back to the larger group. So I'm curious, what did you notice? What are some of your nuggets? If you raise your hand, Mikey will run around, or you can yell it out if you want to do that.
Oh, we are recording.
Oh, you may not yell.
For video people.
Transformation is possible.
Yes, transformation is possible.
Kind attention.
Beautiful.
Restful curiosity.
Restful curiosity. I like that. What else? Yeah.
Compassionate circle of men.
Compassionate
Circle of men.
circle of men. Great.
Good morning, I love you.
Yes.
Good morning, I love you anytime during the day.
Good morning, good afternoon, I love you, good night, I love you. We've gotten all variations. Yeah.
Attitude, intention, attention.
Great, yeah. It's the IAA model, the technical name.
Love those well-meaning parts of yourself that pull you away from where you want to go.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, for me it was that we're always practicing. We're always reinforcing something.
Right,
Always.
right, in every single moment.
Every
so
moment.
It's what do you want to practice right now?
Yeah.
Even if you just made a mistake, okay, here's the next moment. How do you want to handle it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
What you practice grows stronger.
Yes. Yes. Any others? Wonderful. So we are going to take some questions now. And I know Mikey had one for me that we can start with, and then we'll see where we go.
Yeah, just to get things rolling. So you've been, it feels like walking this beautiful edge between a sort of a deep practitioner and also a scientist exploring these ideas. And I think that in many ways that's a kind of a defining quality of a lot of people in this space, whether they're entrepreneurs or they are engineers or they are designers, that there's some kind of convergence happening where they're maybe just holding a practice also as part of their life, but they may actually be trying to integrate that practice into the expression of what they're doing into the world. And so my question for you is, how does your practice and the wisdom that you've gained from that practice, how does that weave into your role as a scientist? And has it changed the way that you do science?
That's such a great question. I think the first response is, how does my practice integrate? My practice keeps me alive, truly. And yes, it definitely informs all of the questions I ask scientifically. So I think I can't imagine studying mindfulness and meditation without having a meditation practice, right? So part of what I look at is how do we change, and I watch my own mind and I watch where I get stuck and see if it helps, and then I go and kind of look at the science behind it. So with shame, that came completely out of my personal experience. It wasn't like there was some book that I read that said, this is how we change. It was in my own practice, watching how I would criticize myself and beat myself up. And I remember there was a moment where one of my teachers said, watch the tone of your voice when your mind wanders. How do you bring yourself back? And I realized I was going, damn it, Shauna, why you've been doing this for 10 years, why can't you do it? And that was a pivotal shift for me of, it's not just about paying attention or doing it right, it's how we relate to ourselves, kind of like what you said. And then looking at, well, what leads to change, and then going and looking at the science of it as well. So it's, they both inform each other. And I have to say the science also really serves, because a lot of times I start having doubts, and I'll be sitting and I'll be like, why am I doing this? And I should be doing something else. And then I'll be like, oh, I'm improving my immune system right now, and I'm lengthening my telomeres, and I'm gonna sleep better. And and when I'm working with patients, I remind them of the science, and it not just makes me credible, which is nice, but it creates safety for them. So I feel really grateful to be weaving these spirituality or mindfulness or consciousness with science. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. Okay. Yes.
You mentioned that touching the heart releases oxytocin. So it's just the act of touching the heart.
Just touching your heart, which I'm having trouble because my speaker is underneath here, so I don't know if I'm messing you up every time I do it. But yes, just touching your heart releases oxytocin. Yeah. And I mean, so does getting massage and having sex and nursing and lots of different things. But it's a simple one, and you probably won't be nursing anytime soon. So.
Would you mind giving some other examples, like you just quickly did there? You mentioned also for dopamine that the kind attention releases dopamine, the touching the heart, I suppose holding puppies.
Absolutely.
Could you maybe give a few more of the
Sure.
physical things that create these positive?
Well, so smiling is a good one. Gratitude is another wonderful thing that releases any positive emotion, releases dopamine. So, and what's interesting is when we experience positive emotions, we kind of we just zip through them. When something negative happens, we're stuck in it and we're trying to figure it out. And evolutionarily, that made sense. But at this point, what we're learning how to do is how do we actually take in a positive experience and let it nourish us and let it become part of our chemical soup. And Rick Hansen, he's a wonderful neuroscientist, he writes a lot about that in Hardwiring Happiness. So I highly recommend that book, and it's all about how do we integrate this and how do we, it's a consciousness hacking. Yeah, great, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so thank you. Talking about the science, there seems to be also a little bit of research being done about potential adverse effects, and I feel like we don't talk about them enough, especially if extended practice going on Vipassana retreats. There's a little bit of research indicating that people have some adverse reactions, sometimes severe. I've seen people have to leave meditation retreats. Is that something that you study also, and can you talk a little bit about maybe potential ways we should be mindful also of how much mindfulness we practice, and things to do that in a safe way?
It's a really important question, and I think deserves our kind attention. There's someone named Willoughby Britton. She's at Brown, and she does a lot. You've read some of her work? So she's a really dear friend of mine, and I keep abreast of what's happening. It's not a particular research that I do. However, as with anything powerful and transformational, it can bring up stuff that can, if not held in the right container, be iatrogenic. One of the most, I'd say, dangerous or the biggest pitfalls of meditation that I've seen in my personal practice and working I'm a clinical psychologist, is, so as we start to become mindful, we can go two ways. One is we kind of all of a sudden see these parts of ourselves that before we were repressing, and it gets really scary, and we start to get depressed because it's like, oh my God, I'm so selfish and I'm so narcissistic and I'm so impatient, because all of a sudden you're seeing all these parts of yourselves. So that's why I believe the kind attention is so important, because otherwise, as soon as you start to focus inward, it's not pretty, right? Anne Lamott has a wonderful line. She says, your mind is like a dangerous neighborhood. You don't want to go there alone, right? So it requires this kindness, this companionship. The other pitfall I see is, so mindfulness teaches us to really observe and witness, I'm noticing my depression I'm noticing the depression instead of my sadness, or I'm noticing the fear instead of my anxiety. So that's really helpful because it creates some space, some gaps, so we can see things more clearly. But it becomes problematic when we take it too far, because then we become detached. And we're like, oh, whatever, there's a suicidal thought, or, oh, it's just a thought. So you can see where we start to lose intimacy with other people. It's like, oh, I don't need them because everything's impermanent and we're all going to rise and pass away. And so, right, so you get this. And so where I believe is, I really think meditation and mindfulness have to do with cultivating greater intimacy. And it gives us the capacity to deal with the tenderness that is required to be intimate, the vulnerability and authenticity that's required. So again, there's pitfalls along the way all the time, and it's such a nuanced, delicate practice. It requires a lot of care and I think a lot of mentorship and teaching. I'm so grateful for all of the extraordinary teachers I've had. Yeah, thank you for that question. It's helpful. Hi.
Hi. Sort of similar question about the science of all of this. I'm not a scientist. I'm interested in following it. Where are the best places to go and kind of follow this sort of science for someone who isn't...
Definitely my book. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, who doesn't have access to all the journals and all that.
Yeah, so there's so much published online right now, whatever you wanted to look up, if you want to see like, how does mindfulness affect the brain, or how does it affect insomnia, or how does it affect marriage or sex, or whatever it is, you can probably Google search it. I was kind of kidding, but we do have a textbook coming out. Our earlier one was published in 2009, but I have a new book, The Art and Science of Mindfulness, coming out in January of 2017 that summarizes all of the literature. But it's honestly a little boring, so if it were me, I would go online and just find like the kind of cool, interesting, snapshots of it. Yeah. I had to read the proofs recently, and I was like falling asleep. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote this in such a boring way. How's anyone gonna read it? I'm so, I just finally wrote them. I'm like, I think it's all good. Just publish it. Anyhow, yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh,
yes, and
sorry.
then yes.
Got the microphone.
Yeah, you got the mic.
So I have two questions for you. So, so the basic concept of like fake it till you make it, is that true? And is that in a sense that that's what you're doing, saying these things to you, eventually it will come up? And
so
then
let's stay with this question first, because it's so
Sure.
important, and then we'll go to the second one, but I'll
Sure.
forget it. Fake it till you make it. So again, with everything it seems in mindfulness, there's a paradox, right? So on the one hand, we're really intending to be authentic and to welcome all of our experience, even the yucky, difficult, impatient, frustrated, angry, petty ones, right? So that's not really in alignment with fake it till you make it, because that's like, be with what's true. However, you don't want to indulge in those things and carve out those pathways. And so what I've come to, and I'm not sure this is right, but what I've come to is, it's a different pathway when I'm feeling depressed than when I'm holding my depression with kindness. It's a different pathway. And so I'm not faking anything, but I'm bringing kindness to my experience, and it's changing it. And so that's one part of the answer. The second part is I do believe in practice. You know, it's like you're lifting weights. And if I want to grow this muscle, even though I don't feel like it, I'm going to have to lift some weights. And so sometimes I will sit and do practices. Maybe I don't feel very grateful. I'll sit down and write down everything I'm grateful for. And by the end, I do feel grateful. And so I don't know if it's faking it, but it's inclining the mind and the heart in the direction you want to go. Because we usually, you know, end up going where we're headed. Right? I think Yogi Berra said something like that. Yeah. What's the second one? Oh, we lost the mic.
Whoops, sorry.
I'll repeat it, Mikey.
Just wondering, like, you've dealt with people that have PTSD and so on. So how often is a big change? Does that happen frequently? And then also, does a channel sort of open for those people, which is always accessible, or do you know, or is there chances that you go back to that? Just kind of wondering your experience.
Great question.
Thank you.
So the first answer would be big transformation is possible in any moment. In any moment. Like right now, you could have one, right? There's infinite possibilities in the present moment when we stay open. Usually we're on such automatic pilot and we have our belief systems and they're so set that it's challenging for people to wake up and change. And yet it can happen in any moment. When you have big transformational experiences, do you then go back to your kind of being asleep? Absolutely. And then you open up again. And so it's really a process and a path. You know, Ram Dass has that wonderful quote, you fall off the path 1,000 times, the trick is to get back on 1,001. And so what I've come to is, you know, even the whole idea of enlightenment as like some end stage doesn't make sense anymore. It's moments, it's moments and moments. And some moments I'm free, and some moments I'm not. And so what I practice is kind of noticing moments of freedom and noticing moments of contraction. And just every moment's a new moment. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Hi. Yes, thank you for the great talk. So I encountered the idea of mindfulness and meditation a couple of years ago and read a few books, and I'm definitely, you know, a subscriber of the benefits. However, I've found it difficult to actually make it a practice. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can share some insights from your studies and your personal experience. You know, after your 1 week in Thailand, what happened? Did you stumble? How did you develop the long-term practice that led to where you are now?
Yeah, wonderful question. There's lots of different ways. I ended up spending 3 months in Thailand. So for me, it was full on in. And what I recommend to my patients or people I'm working with is first, find what inspires you to do this. What is your intention? What do you really value? Second is make a commitment to yourself that you can actually do. So even if it's 5 minutes a week, commit to that and then do it for a while. 5 minutes a week is probably, you're not gonna see a ton of change right away, but even if it's just, you know, sometimes I say to people, just every day when you wake up, sit on your cushion for a minute or 2 minutes. And when you wanna get up, but make a commitment to yourself. Know that you're taking care of yourself. And then third is be compassionate, right? When you beat yourself up, it's not gonna work anyway. If it worked, I would probably say go ahead and try beating yourself up, but it just doesn't work. So find your values, your intention, and then make a commitment to a practice, and then stay compassionate. Yeah, and then I think the more you can do it like with people in community, the more that you can find teachers. If you go to my website, I have free meditations that you can follow, just getting support. We're not supposed to do this alone. Like, we're not supposed to do this life alone. And I think we're gonna do 5 more minutes. How are we doing?
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Let's do like
5. Let's do 2 more questions.
2 more questions.
So my website is drshaunashapiro.maybe.com. They told me I had to get a website a couple years ago, and I was like, oh, what? I'm not great with that part. But Dr. Shauna Shapiro, you'll find it. And if you go to there's free meditations on the website. .com. Do you check it out? Oh, good. Okay, well, who has it? Yeah, so we're gonna do 2 more questions. You're gonna for sure get a question, so we're gonna do 3 then. Okay, yes.
Hi. I'm curious about the science of shame, and in particular, if you could speak more about when at a time in our human existence was shame ever helpful? Because you talked a little bit about how shame, it taps into the survival parts of our brain, which is helpful.
Right.
So just curious about that.
It's a great question, and I think in some ways it's semantics. I had a really long conversation with my dad about this, because my dad is very much about, like, you see what's wrong, you talk about it, you not necessarily shame the person, but you want them to feel remorse, and then they change. And it's a very different approach than this. And yet we had a conversation, and I do believe remorse and seeing things clearly is it motivates us to change. So that's not the part of the equation I'm talking about. I'm talking about the part where you already know you want to change, and then you just beat yourself up over and over and over again. And I think evolutionarily they're subtly different, but they got kind of maybe wired together. I think remorse is really important to look and see it clearly. And I think it's so painful to go back into mistakes you've made that without kindness, you can't even go there, right? So one of my favorite teachings is by Tara Brach, and she says, it's not your fault and you're responsible, okay? It's not your fault. Causes and conditions led you here. Maybe your upbringing, maybe your genetics, whatever it is, it's not your fault. But as soon as you bring your mindfulness to it and you see it clearly, you're responsible. And that's the moment I'm talking about. So the remorse is, it's not your fault, but the shame usually comes after. You see it clearly, and then you're like, oh my God, okay? So I'll give you an example. Some years ago, I was teaching with Tara Brach, and we were in Seattle, and she taught this teaching about it's not your fault, but you're responsible. And I loved it. And I came home, and my son had been away, and he was not happy with me. And so I cooked his favorite dinner of spaghetti and pasta. And we sit down at the table, and he takes a bite, and he's like, gross. And he like throws his fork down. And I'm exhausted. I just got off the plane. I'd been teaching. And I'm like, go to your room. Really, really a little bit overreacting, yelled at him. He goes to his room. He's crying. I'm in the kitchen cleaning up. And I'm like, you're such a crappy mom. You just spent the whole weekend teaching compassion to 500 people, and now you're like yelling at your son because he probably missed you and is acting out. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, God, I'm hypocritical, terrible. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this is not my fault. Causes and conditions led me here, but now I'm responsible. And I can sit here and beat myself up and shame myself while my son's crying in his room, or I can go to his room and say, I'm so sorry I overreacted, and it's not okay to throw your meatball on the floor, right? So it's not your fault, it's not okay, and you're responsible. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I don't know which, yes.
Here, I have a question on how you draw the line of where science is, because I can imagine in this field, it's pretty edge, and there can be lots of theories. For example, unproven like quantum science, or even like theories of law of attraction, or those kind of things. I wonder if you thought of this, or what you think of this, or if this line changes in the field of mindfulness.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is mindfulness as a field is not fringe. In fact, I just applied for a grant, and I used to apply for grants to the Alternative Medicine, National Institute of Health Alternative, NCAM it's called. And they're like, no, you have to apply to the NIH, the National Institute of Health, because this is too mainstream. It's not alternative anymore. Okay, so mindfulness is an alternative. Now, what you're talking about with the quantum physics, the law of attraction, that's not exactly my field. And what I would say is, if we bring rigorous science to it, objectivity and clarity, I think we can explore these things. And there may be some things that are in the great mystery, and I'm open to those as well. Yeah, great. Last question. I think he was who has it? I think he had his hand up for a while. Yeah.
Thanks again. Hi, Shauna. Hi. I'm sure you're familiar with the recent meta-analysis of something like 18,000 studies on meditation and mindfulness. And they found it worked, but it wasn't any more effective than exercise or progressive muscle relaxation or cognitive behavioral therapy. So is it maybe overrated?
We can't end with this question. No, I was kidding. So I think it's really, really important. I think that there is like a hop on the mindfulness bandwagon right now, and it's like a cure-all, and everyone's like, this is, and I believe that mindfulness is powerful, and I don't think it's a cure-all. I think exercise is powerful, and it's not a cure-all. What's interesting is in a study done maybe 15, 20 years ago, they did a huge meta-analysis of all psychotherapy. And they found that everything works equally. You know, like the humanist versus cognitive behavior therapy versus Freudian psychoanalysis, they all fighting back and forth.
So you just got to do something.
You kind of have to just do something. But what's interesting is what's the underlying mechanism of action? What's the underlying thing? And I think that those are the questions that I'm interested in. Not like, is mindfulness better than exercise, or is transcendental meditation better than mindfulness? Is what are the underlying mechanisms that lead to transformation? Kind attention, I really believe, could be. And so the research I'm going to do now is studying that underlying mechanism. And kind attention can happen when you're doing exercise. It can happen during psychotherapy. It can happen right now as we're talking to each other.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good distinction, the emphasis on kindness.
Right.
Because that's not typically part of mindfulness practice.
It's, you know, it's interesting. It's not part of the way it's taught. And the first time I wrote about this was back in 1998, and it was for a book chapter in the Handbook of Self-Regulation. And I remember I wrote the whole chapter, and they sent it back and they said, everything's great, we love it all, except take out that whole part about the attitude, like that kindness, the warmth, the generosity. They're like, everything else was perfect. And my PhD advisor was like, just take it out. You never get, you know, usually you have to rewrite the whole thing. He's like, this is great. And I'm like, I can't, because of what the monk taught me. And so I agree with you. I think my vision or intention is to re-operationalize mindfulness so that people really understand that this kindness piece isn't just a footnote, that it's an essential part.
Yeah, it's sort of like lubrication in the, the machine. Without it, it's like
good analogy.
Got a bunch of gears grinding against each other.
Yes, we are ending here. Ending, closing down the talk.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that was the last question, but I'll hang out afterwards and answer other questions.
And are you able to stay for the breakout sessions?
I'm not going to be here for that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and one of the things that I want to emphasize from your talk, which I think kind of relates to what was said, is that transformation is real and is possible. And mindfulness, among other things, is a pointer to transformation. And that we have it structured as an entry, as a taste, as something that we can begin to get a foothold into this possibility of transformation, or this endless path of transformation. But what's being pointed to and held by scientists such as you is the recognition that what's possible is also something that's far beyond what's often talked about in an 8-week mindfulness course.
Absolutely.
And thank you for holding that light and for pointing us there.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna.